So now we get to the bureaucracy, which I've alluded to several times, and again with a very long history. Cabinet officials historically rely on experienced civil servants to run the state, um, as they did in the early post-war period when the political elites were actually purged. So what you have here is a highly competitive bureaucracy that again has a very long history. In the bureaucracy, you take exams, and later on, if you're not up to snuff, you're pushed out. Very much unlike the U.S. bureaucracy, which is considered a very safe job. Once you're in, you're in. What's really important about the Japanese bureaucracy is this very incestuous relationship with others in this triangle that we talked about. So the triangle is composed of these political elites, the bureaucracy, and business. And so you've got some crossover from the bureaucracy to the political sphere. And then often people will go on and take senior positions in corporations. What this means is that policy is really influenced by sake, sake being this alcoholic drink. Sorry, I had to clarify that. Although the diet can also help assure that things don't go too far. So you had scandals in the 1990s, which led to more political influence over the administration. And then this sort of reversal, but it's very difficult. So when the Democratic Party, for example, came to power, you can imagine how they had this enormous hump isn't the right word, enormous mountain to get over in terms of all the reforms that they had promised. And that's why they couldn't get over these, couldn't pass these reforms. Now, in terms of civil society, in Japan, there are very low levels of civil society. There are business interest groups. They've got a federation of economic organizations. They give to campaigns, and remember, the campaigns are very expensive. They can also voice their dissent. You've got agricultural interest groups, like the Central Union of Agricultural Cooperatives, that tend to want protectionism. But you don't have unions. You don't have consumer groups of any power, etc. So generally, they're not. The civil society is not very influential in the running of Japanese politics. And what I could ask, what might explain low levels of civil society in Japan? And I'll ask that right now, and I want you to pause this little thing and think about it. Well, one thing might be culture. It's a very deferential culture. Confucian culture is very deferential in general. Another thing might be this forced democratization from above. Right? This wasn't like in the UK case or in the French or U.S. cases where you had the demands for democracy from below. Instead, it was installed from above. So there are a couple of reasons right there. I'm sure you could think of some more. In terms of political economy, under the Meiji in the 19th century, it was basically modernize or disappear. And so they pursued this mercantilist policy, or set of policies. And there's still remnants of this. It is a capitalist developmental state. The priority has been on economic development over regulation or welfare. So the state guides the market using tariffs and other barriers and subsidies to targeted industries to protect these targeted industries. But it's based on private property and profits. Well, there are subsidies, so we're not talking about a liberal system. There's very little emphasis on welfare, so we're not talking about a social democratic system. This is a typical mercantilist platform. This was challenged in the 1980s as companies moved overseas with the high cost of business in Japan. You had inefficient industries in the Iron Triangle, though, that were maintaining state favors. And we talked about export-oriented industrialization, import substitution. The problem with these things is that once you start giving benefits to certain companies, more companies want them, and it's harder to get rid of them because they become less competitive. Now, with export-oriented industrialization, the lack of competition is less important, less salient, and less meaningful because really you're talking about by nature competitive industries, and that's how they sell their goods abroad. But it does lead to more demand for state favors. In the 1980s, I mentioned before, you had an asset bubble with these inflated stock and real estate markets, and this bursts in 1992. And the government kept supporting useless firms and banks raising debt. And so really what you had was this corporate welfare over competition. And this is not done very well for Japan. So Japan is still mired in these economic doldrums. With the LDP now back in power and promising to reinvigorate the economy in new ways. So that's all on Japan. So I'm going to stop it right here. Oh, it was only a 5-minute section. Huh.